Good evening, guys. It's Miss Clyber here. I'm going to talk to you about, Alright, good evening, guys. It's Miss Clyber here. We're going to talk about changes in community, which is section 4. So that should be the top of your paper. We're going to discuss primary and secondary succession. So the objectives here are to describe the differences between primary and secondary succession. Primary and secondary succession occurs over a long period of time. Primary succession is a series of changes where there's no soil or organisms, so it's a brand new area, never been developed. No organisms currently exist there. So this typically occurs where there's a new island formation or an eruption of a volcano. This is where they're going to occur. First species to populate the area are pioneer species. These pioneer species are kind of like settlers that settled America. They're the first ones to get there and establish the land. And pioneer species are going to help break down rocks and turn them into soil. So rocks are actually soil is actually broken down bits of rocks and other types of debris and turned into this powdery-like substance. So over time that these pioneer species work on developing the rocks, it's turning into soil so that other organisms that can live in soil can eventually establish themselves in the ground. Over time, you're going to end up with an ecosystem. So let's look at a timeline here. First, we have a volcano erupt. So there's no soil, only ash and rock. Then our pioneer species move in. Our pioneer species are things like moss and lichen. Lichen is like really soft, fuzzy looking stuff you sometimes see in your grass where there's really bare soil there all the time. It's kind of like a bacteria almost, but not bacteria. Soil. As the pioneer species grow and die, soil forms and becomes plants grown in the new soil. So they're going to eventually allow these new plants to come in and grow in the soil. And finally, we have a forest. So we start here with nothing and end up with a lush forest with different types of vegetation and animal life. Well, how do they get there? Sounds kind of weird. Well, if you think about it, if you have a new island developing in the middle of the ocean, what's around? Water, wind, and other organisms flying over. So as those organisms fly over, they're going to excrete waste, such as rocks, and their waste contains things like seeds, and berries. And as they excrete this waste, it's going to get into these crevices, and these little seeds are going to start to develop and grow. Another way is by wind. So organisms are passed through by the wind, or they can be carried on things like water. So as the waves crash in and bring in new debris to the rock, it's going to have maybe some small organisms. Sometimes a spider is on a leaf floating in the ocean. There's lots of different organisms that are going to make their way there over time. So we're going to watch the succession video at another time. So here we have another timeline. You have exposed rock, lichen and moss developing the rock, breaking it down. Eventually small herbs and shrubs growing. As those shrubs grow, they're going to allow for other organisms to move into place as well. And it's going to attract things like tree seedlings. And over time, they're going to grow and develop, and we're going to have a nice new ecosystem. So let's look at secondary succession. Secondary succession occurs after an ecosystem has already been there. So it's when an ecosystem has been completely wiped out by things such as fires, hurricanes, and tornadoes. They're natural disturbances in our ecosystem. Human activities including farming, logging, and mining can also cause secondary succession to occur. Think about farming. We're tearing up the soil, and you're going to cause things to happen in the land. Also, farming causes fertilizers to spread into the ponds. The ponds over time can fill in through the process of, you know it, eutrophication. So there you have another form of secondary succession. It goes from a nice big pond to a grassy field, and a whole new ecosystem will exist. Secondary succession occurs more rapidly than primary succession because there's already organisms that has already been there and established. You already have the soil there established. You're not establishing something from a solid rock. Over time, as those rocks break down, they turn into soil, which is what organisms need. And they're also going to be closer to a lot more species due to already existing, and people are going to know about the area. Secondary succession occurs where an ecosystem has already existed. So primary is the first ever establishment, and over time that primary ecosystem can also then turn into a secondary succession if something happens, like a hurricane, fire, tornado, human activity will cause secondary succession to occur. We'll watch the secondary succession on your own. It's a YouTube video. It doesn't play very well through my computer, so I'll load that up to Blend Space. So here is an example, okay? Secondary succession is going to start off a little bit differently. You're going to have a little bit more soil and maybe some seedlings developing. Then over time, the grasses and other organisms are going to grow and continue establishing a forest. Think about the California and Colorado forest fires. That secondary succession happens quite a bit in those areas where it's very dry, and they lose the entire ecosystem. However, some of those seedlings get buried in that soil, and they get covered by the ash, and over time, the seedlings start to come back and regrow, and actually grows back thicker and healthier. A lot of farmers actually practice burning fields as well, because it comes back, and the nutrients from the fire and the burning of the organisms actually kind of help the land as well. So it's one of those practices. Very simple process, takes time. One happens naturally, the other one, well, they both happen naturally, obviously. Dumb is clever. One starts from the beginning of nothing, the other one is established from an ecosystem that has already existed. So let's do a little Venn diagram. So on your paper, draw 2 circles that cross over. Okay, label at the bottom, 1 primary, 1 secondary. Okay, so let's try to fill this in as to what would be different and what would be the same about primary and secondary succession. Well, pioneer species, first of all, is only going to be in primary, because we said in secondary it's already is an existing ecosystem. So there's a difference. So pioneer species are not really found in secondary succession because there's already been nutrients there. Plants mature and soil becomes fertile. That does happen over time for both of them. So that would be in the middle. Primary succession occurs, actually this volcano could be both, because it's going to cause primary succession, but it can also cause secondary succession to occur. So I'm going to put that one in the middle because it's kind of a cause of both. The fire from a volcano could wipe out a piece of land and cause secondary succession to occur. However, a volcano could establish new rock to cause a primary succession to occur. Lichens and mosses are going to come in and develop that rock. So that would be a difference between primary and secondary, because you're already going to have the seedlings from fire. So fires typically are dealing with secondary succession. And new habitats form, that kind of happens in both of them, because it's going to bring in maybe some new species. So here you have primary and secondary succession compared and contrasted. Now, I have a song. I'll upload it too for you to watch as well. Please let me know if you have any questions. I'll see you in class.